Welcome to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns. I recently read the travel book, Not Cool, Europe by Train in a Heatwave. And I'm telling you, I smiled and nodded my way through the whole thing. Well, today I'm joined by the book's author, travel writer Jules Brown, to talk about the epic 9-night, 9-country sprint that inspired his book. It was a trip that included, but was certainly not limited to, nearly suffering heat stroke, spending a night in jail, battling both train carriage boozers and window shade pullers, while still finding the time to take in A-list capital cities and jaw-dropping alpine scenery. What makes this trip especially inspiring is that in each destination, Jules made it a point to do something offbeat or see a lesser-known site or two. On the show, Jules tells me about how he found his way into a life as a professional travel writer before we chat about the aforementioned adventure, reliving both highlights and lowlights, the latter being full of those travel moments that only seem funny once you made it home. All right, let's hop aboard.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
Welcome to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns, travel writer Jules Brown. Jules, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
I got inspired to get in touch with you by this book that you put out called Not Cool, about a smash and grab, quick hit, 9-night adventure across Europe. But before we get to that, there's lots more to unpack. How did you fall in love with travel and get to be, a travel writer and do what a lot of people would be very jealous of?
Yeah, that's what I used to hear. I mean, I have spent pretty much my whole working life as a travel writer and made a living from it. And as you rightly say, when most people hear that, they say that's how fantastic, and how did you do that? And I'd love to do that. And the last thing you can ever say is you can never complain about it ever. So you have to bear that in mind. But I may lift the veil a little bit as we go on. But obviously it's a very cool thing to do. I got into it by doing it, by going traveling. I went to college. I got a straight out of college job in London working in a council, and I did 2 years of that, and I was 23 years old, and I thought, I can't do this for the rest of my life. So I quit and I went off to Europe and just traveled around for 6 months. And it was right in the sort of early days of the new wave of travel writing. So when guidebooks like Rough Guides and Lonely Planet were first coming out, so we're talking about back in the early 80s. And I had a rough guide to Portugal with me, the first edition of that, which I took with me just as a guidebook, not intending to do anything with it, and I took some notes as I went and came back 6 months later, having been to Spain and Portugal and Italy and Turkey and all sorts of places. And they always have a thing at the back of guidebooks, if you've got any updates or any contributions, write in. So I wrote the guys a letter and just sent them all the bits of information I'd, covered I spent 8 weeks in Portugal, going up and down Portugal on the trains and buses, and just kind of never really thought anything about that. And this was in the days before email. I got a letter back saying, that's fantastic. If you're ever in London and would like to discuss travel writing, give us a call. So I went down to London on the train the very next day and called them.
So you played it cool.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, straight down there. Just happened to be here. And I met the founder of Rough Guides in a pub just off Leicester Square. And we basically got drunk, and he offered me a book contract. And that was that, and that's how we rolled in those days. There was no job application. There was no screening and vetting. There was no qualifications required.
No background checks, importantly.
No background checks. He offered me a writing job on Scandinavia Guide. They were doing a new Scandinavia guide. I'd never been to Scandinavia. And he had no idea I could write, I suppose, other than the endless, updates I'd sent him. But I think, like a lot of those books got commissioned in the early days, it was it was a feeling kind of thing, a vibes kind of thing. He was, he's a really nice bloke. Mark Ellingham, the man is a really successful book publisher, has been for, 40 years now. So that was me. I had a contract in my hand in, a couple of weeks, and I went off to Scandinavia for 3 months and wrote the first edition of the Rough Guide to Scandinavia with another guy he'd found. So I fell into it. What can I say? It was pure luck. I mean, a little bit of persistence on my side, but it was one of those, I was in the right place at the right time. They were commissioning an awful lot of travel guides. They were really taking off in those days. There was money and support around to do it. So yeah, that's pretty much how I started. And one thing led to another. One book led to another.
Obviously, they must have been impressed by these notes you were sending in.
I guess so. As I said, it was probably in the very early days, and I don't know how many people were actually doing that. And I don't know. It's more difficult now because that kind of outlet doesn't really exist. I mean, those books still exist, but they don't sell anything like they used to. It's one of the reasons I stopped doing it in the end. The kind of bottom fell out of the guidebook market. People just do not buy travel guidebooks in the way they used to. You have the world's information on your phone in your pocket. You don't need them. You don't book hotels on the back of them. People don't find out information like that anymore. I was in at the other end of that before it all started. What can I say? I did a humanities degree. I'm a history graduate. I could clearly string a sentence together. They were looking for people who had experience of travel, which I'd had. I'd been interrailing around Europe on my own before. So I guess that was it. But, if I really sit down and think about it, I have no idea why I got offered the gig in the first place.
Personal relationships and got drunk with them in the pub. So.
Yeah, there you go. That's how I'd employ everyone, I think.
Let's talk about that interrailing trip, because you really, painted a great picture. At the beginning of this book, you took us back to your first European rail adventure when you were 17. You took us to this train station in Mürren up in the Swiss Alps. It was kind of a nostalgic way to start things, but just tell me a little bit about that adventure and what, all these years later, what are those memories that stick out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hadn't thought about that trip for a long time, for obvious reasons. It was a lifetime ago. It was a different century, It sounds crazy when you say that now, but the year I left school before I went to college, birthday's late in the year, so I wasn't even 18. I went interrailing around Europe, as a lot of people did those days, but it really had only just started. The first interrail pass was 1972, and I went in 1980. So it was kind of the early days of that as well. The aim was to go to a work camp in the Swiss Alps, like an international youth work camp, and there were 20 of us or so, all from different countries. I have no idea now how we found out about it, because again, no internet. So it literally must have been an advert in a newspaper or something.
Like from school, maybe? Through school? Or?
Yeah, or something like that, very possibly. So for 3 weeks, I lived in a chalet in the Swiss Alps with 20 other people all my age, between 18 and 22, something like that, digging hiking paths. Do the work in the morning and you'd have the afternoon off, and we were there for 3 weeks. It was fantastic. And then after that, I did a month's traveling around with an interrail pass, and that was the first time I'd really, had Europe at my feet as a young person, and it opened my eyes. 5 years later, when I was landing a job at Rough Guides, that experience was still fairly fresh, and that's partly what informed it. And I knew that I liked traveling. That was something I clearly wanted to carry on doing. And if I could get someone to pay me to do that, well, so much the better, So I guess that happened. And then I had a guidebook writing job, and I never really thought about that trip anymore. And so this is the first time I'm going to invite you to feel sorry for me as a jobbing travel writer. So I spent the next 30 years writing guidebooks to all sorts of places all over the world. But, I was writing a book on Hong Kong. I had to go to Hong Kong. I couldn't also spend 6 months in the Philippines and Bali and whatever else at the time, because I didn't have the money to do that. I had the money to go and spend some time in Hong Kong or Sicily or Scandinavia or all the other places I went to. So I'd missed that kind of, let's just get a train ticket and go somewhere kind of travel. And again, it also sounds weird to say that for a lot of that time, I never actually had a holiday. And again, let's not feel too sorry for me here. I was writing guidebooks to Barcelona and Portugal and Washington, D.C. as well, and all the rest of it. So I was going places and I was having a great time. But yeah, it wasn't that let's just get on a train and see what happens. So when it finally came to thinking about doing that again, which is where this book, Not Cool, came from, that was the idea. I'd buy a rail pass and I needed a challenge. I needed something to make some point of it. And I really wasn't thinking about writing a book at this point. It was just more my kind of character, really. I didn't want to just aimlessly drift around. I thought, now I'll give myself something to do. So I came up with a route that was nine cities in 9 countries in 9 days. I thought that's doable.
It was kind of remarkable the way you drew up the itinerary. Were there any other rough drafts of the itinerary that didn't make the cut?
Not really. Once I decided that I really wanted to do that kind of bang, bang, bang train interrail thing, then it kind of arranged itself, because this was Central Europe I was really concentrating on. It's Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, because they're all fairly easy to bang, 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 2-hour trip, 4-hour trip, 4-hour trip, overnight trip. But the rest of Europe, Europe's a big place. And a lot of those, if you want to draw more countries into that, the trip suddenly becomes a whole lot longer and takes more out of you, really. So no, I wanted a short, sharp bash, and it turned into a book, and it turned into a ridiculous book, because obviously it was just a crazy idea, and it was.
You're not, and to be clear, as a great read as this is, you're not necessarily recommending anyone try this book.
No, you really. No, I did it, so you don't have to. You really don't want to do this. I don't know. I'm on a couple of Facebook, rail forums, interrail, and there's a big divide between people who do exactly what I do a lot of the time, which is want to see as many places as I possibly can. I want to not, I literally want to knock off places I've never been. I like that. I mean, it's ridiculous, but I do like doing that. And a load of people who are always like, oh, unless you spend, 4 weeks in the city of so-and-so, you haven't seen it properly. And I think, I haven't got time for that. Not anymore.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see it both ways, and I travel both ways. But, the cool thing is you can at least say, even if you're only doing one night, which I would never do 9 one nights, I don't think, half of the experience is the getting between A and B. So at least, that's not being shortchanged. You're getting that experience full throttle, as you did on this trip, which is what I want to get into. Is you made it clear too, you didn't set yourself unrealistic expectations. You just said, I'm going to do one kind of off the beaten path thing in each place, see a different side of these cities. And that seemed like a real recipe for success.
I think so. I mean, obviously I had fairly limited time. I was still kind of working at this time, so I was fitting this in a finite period. But yeah, I thought that, there's no real point going to Vienna and attempting to see any of the museums and galleries in an overnight trip. What's the point in doing that? And who would care anyway? So yeah, I was trying to find some more offbeat things that I think, well, I'll remember that. That sounds really cool. I'll go and do that. That's a side of Vienna or Bratislava or a couple of places I'd never been to, like Berlin. And that struck me that I'm going to Berlin for, a day and a half. What could I possibly hope to see in that time? I'm going to go back at some time in my life. So let's just find the couple of things that sound really cool. So that was my approach, really. And then by doing that, you're not necessarily following the crowds. You're not getting hooked into queuing up for the one big thing you really ought to see. And it's serendipitous. You start to discover other things that you had either never heard about or someone mentions when you're on the train, and that was really cool. So yeah, that was kind of what I did with that. And I think that's really how I travel now. I still do rush around a bit too much for my own good, especially on trains. But as you've said, the journey's half the deal anyway. That's what I like doing. I like sitting on trains, watching the next country unfold, the next region. That to me is part of it. And if I get somewhere and just spend a couple of nights, that's okay. I don't need to feel that's been too rushed.
Not to put too simple of a point on it, but yeah, it's still better than nothing. Like if you've never been to Berlin and you got there for one night, like the simple truth is you did experience it, and no one can take that away from you. You were in Berlin, you smelled it, you saw it. That's being in Berlin.
I think that's true. I mean, the truth is, now I've got enough time, to spend as much time as I want in all these places that I go to. But I mean, I got to come home at some point. My wife's going to kill me if I don't. There's so much to see in the world, and there's so much I haven't seen. So I do know that I don't travel like a lot of people travel. That's okay. I've made my peace with that. The bonus for me is that it turns into books that people like. I'm pretty sure, and I know it's the case because I get emails telling me that thank God they don't have to do that. It's great that somebody else has done it and written about it because it made them laugh.
Yeah, one last thing I wanted to mention, in that early trip, I really liked how you talked about how there might have been a moment when you were staring out the window and some seed was planted of, this future life, and that kid who looked out the window would be happy about how it ended up. And I think a lot of people can relate to that who love travel and who have made it a part of their life. There was a moment early on where you're like, I'm not sure how, not sure some way, but there's some magic happening, and I gotta make sure I keep this a part of my life going forward.
It must have been there. I mean, I didn't feel like that at the time. I loved the travel when the very first Interrail card, and I'm a teenager, that was an amazing experience. But, I still came back from that and took a regular office job, did all that. And then even when I jacked all that in and just went off traveling for 6 months, it had never occurred to me that I could make a living out of writing about travel. I suppose at the time I was thinking, well, I've got enough money to last 6 months, then I'll come back, I'll get another terrible job. That's cool. And I suppose that's what I thought it would be. And it was only when I get the magical letter that says, you know what, why don't you come down and chat to us about, and oh, what?
So on the trip that inspired the book, not cool. So how'd things start out?
Well, yeah, I know what you're getting at. See, by this time, when I wrote Not Cool, I'm a long time experienced travel writer, been all over the world.
Savvy, experienced.
Yeah, exactly. I know what I'm doing. And particularly trains in Europe. I've taken trains all over the world. What can I say? I've been on the railway to the bridge over the River Kwai in Thailand. I've taken the train right across New Zealand.
You do it in your sleep.
I know what I'm doing. And I get out at Berlin Airport and get on the train into the centre. And about 25 minutes into the journey, I'm looking out the window and the airport looms around again and it stops and it says Berlin Airport. I don't know what. How is it possible that the very first train for this journey, I've managed to get on the entirely wrong circular train that goes all the way around the suburbs and then ends up back again at the airport? So it didn't start off well. You're quite right, Scott. Thank you very much for pointing that out.
It was smooth sailing from there.
Oh, no, I don't think it just got worse after that, didn't it, really? I mean, yeah, that was my fault. That one was on me. We've all got on the wrong train before now. I do it more than most just because I've taken more trains than most, probably. But so it didn't start off great. But, Berlin was fantastic. I'd never been before. That was an eye-opener. I've got to go back for sure.
Who knew?
Who knew?
Yeah, you kick off your first night. You had yourself a burger, a beer, and you're thinking, wow, why didn't anyone tell me about Berlin?
It was great. So and then I go to Prague. That's a fantastic train ride that I knew that was going to be a great ride. Prague, I'd never been to, so I was interested to see that. So Prague's one of those really good examples of a place that if you've really just got one night, everyone does exactly the same thing. I mean, Prague is a bit of a zoo in the summer. Everyone goes to the Charles Bridge and hangs out. And I kind of thought, well, I can do that. That's okay. But, there's got to be more to it. And I took a little walk through the back streets and found a little bar that wasn't on any list anywhere, and that seemed to me a better way to spend some time than just kind of charge around getting on one of the beer buses or shooting a Kalashnikov off somewhere in an old abandoned military building. All these things are possible in Prague, it seems. But
now this is where I started to get the idea that I think I'm on the same page with Jules here. For the second night in a row, you're in a beer garden.
Funny how that happens. Yeah, that's true. And the same in Vienna, although Vienna, by the time I got to Vienna, kind of interested in the wine. Because again, here's another one of those who knew moments. You know, they make wine in Austria. Well, that was news to me. Vienna was a place I'd been to before, but a long time before. And the only other time I'd been was on a press trip. I used to write a lot of newspaper features, travel features back in the day. And I got sent on press trips all over the place. And press trips are fantastic because, you know, somebody else pays for everything and shows you a good time. And, you know, what's not to like? Except they took us to the opera. And, you know, that's not, I'm sure it was marvelous. It's not really my thing. And they made me wear a tie and I didn't have a tie. So, you know, the guy from the tourist office gave me one of his terrible ties to wear, and you know, they found me a jacket from somewhere, and it was just a very uncomfortable experience all around. And so this time, you know, I'm thinking, well, I don't have to do that, but what am I going to do? And you know, turns out there's a fantastic night market in Vienna, and it has Thai food, and they make wine, and you know, so that seemed a better use of my time.
Yeah, this Nachtmarkt. I've been to Vienna like 3 times and somehow missed it every time, which is a reoccurring theme on this podcast.
Yeah.
I've tried to go to it like 3 times. It's been on my list. I'm going to do that today.
You have to
somehow I haven't.
Yeah. You just wait till mealtime and then go. You know, it was great. And I think again, if you asked anybody's, you know, what's your impressions of Vienna, that's not really the first thing you would think of. This international, you know, Southeast Asian street food in the middle of the city, and you know, sitting outside, and you know, Vienna is pomp and circumstance, and the horses, and the, you know, the parades and the galleries, and the, you know, and so those are the kind of experiences I was trying to seek out, really. And then every place I went, that was really the same deal.
You went from Vienna to Bratislava, which is a short hop.
It's a short hop. It's a terrific train ride, and also you can take the boat as well up the Danube. It's really nice. That was a surprise to me. I'd never been before, and it's like I mean, it's a kind of like a mini Prague these days.
I'm sure they love it when people say that too.
yeah. Well, that's how they market it themselves, you know. Kind of in the sense that, you know, I think the stag and the hen parties have discovered it's cheaper, it's different, but it's beautiful. It's really small, and I really enjoyed that. And again, that was probably the only place on the trip, apart from Liechtenstein, that you spend the night there and you think, yeah, okay, I've done it now. That's okay. I think a night was about right, you know. So what we really ought to add some context to this book. It's called Not Cool, partly as a nod to some sort of old 70s, 80s speak. You know, things being cool and not cool, and but it was in the middle of a heat wave. I mean, and they've become more common now, so it's maybe not as dramatic as it seemed at the time, and we seem to get one every single year. But this was 2019, so this was the year before COVID struck, and it was insanely hot in Central Europe that summer.
When you're planning this, you just in your head, you're thinking dreamy, idyllic summer weather, warm during the day, but cool breezes at night. You hadn't even crossed your mind that you could be walking into a historic style.
No, exactly. I mean, it just sounded lovely, didn't it? You know, strolling the European capitals and sitting outside. It was horrific. It was 42 and 44 degrees. It was just insanely hot. And I was having to get on and off trains with a backpack and hike around to find where I was going to stay, and then do whatever I was going to do. So the kind of that's the context for the book. Was it wasn't fun after a while. It was, and Bratislava, it seemed to me that the only thing to do if I had a day there was to climb up the hill to the castle and back. But I mean, I nearly died. It was 44 degrees. That's not a sensible thing to do.
And for context, for all my Fahrenheit folks out there, we're talking that's between 105 and 110. We're talking.
Oh yeah, no, exactly so. Yes, incredibly hot. And it was the same pretty much every place I went. That was removing an element of fun out of the trip. Highly amusing for everyone who consequently reads the book, but not so great at the time. Bratislava I enjoyed when I'd finally cooled down, and actually in the afternoon I did a really nice thing, which was taking a tour in an, I mean, it wasn't any cooler, but he had the windows open, an old Lada car, if you remember those from the Soviet bloc from the 80s. And a couple of guys had a little tour, offbeat tour company. They loaded you up in their Lada and rolled down the windows, and then they took you on what they called a post-socialist tour. That was great because they really did take you to places that not only would I never have found otherwise, but that we're never going to be on a tourist tour of the city. So, you know, the huge tower block apartment that were built after the Second World War, because this was a city that was, you know, pretty much razed to ground by the retreating Nazis. You know, it was taken by the Red Army. You know, the huge military cemetery recording the heroics of the Russians who liberated the city. You know, the state TV place, the embassy quarter where all the spies used to hang out. It was absolutely fascinating, with a tour by a young guy who'd grown up really, you know, his parents had grown up under communism. He'd grown up under it before the fall of the Berlin Wall had happened, and they'd seen their country change pretty much overnight. And to get that kind of perspective from a local is fantastic. To me, that made that trip to the city, it's what I'll always remember about. It was a real eye-opener.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
Okay, sorry for the interruption, but I just wanted to take a second to say thanks for listening to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns. I hope you're enjoying the show, and it's helping you get excited for your next European adventure. Be sure to check out the episode description, because that's where you'll find a link to the show notes and my social media info. There's also a link to where you can support the podcast by buying me a beer. I mean coffee. Definitely a coffee. And last but not least, if you are enjoying what you're hearing and you have a spare minute, I'd be forever grateful if you were to leave a review on the platform you're listening on, as those little things really do go a long way. Back to the show.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
Yeah, and then you're off to Ljubljana by way of the Semmering Railway, which is the real highlight.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there's a couple of famous rides on this trip, and I tried to shoehorn them in, and they kind of worked. And the Semmering is one. It's the trip from Vienna to Ljubljana, winds up into the Alps. It's extraordinary, really, and it's, you know, 6 hours of just the most dramatic scenery on a little rattly, you know, old style train. I don't know if I was lucky or unlucky in that instance. You know, we were sitting in those old style 6-person compartments 30 years ago, 40 years ago. That's what they were all like. You don't really get those too often these days. So yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, you had some folks hanging out with you though that maybe were.
Yeah, well, you can't choose who you sit next to. I mean, I guess that's true in any train compartment, but these days. But you know, when you're corralled into a 6-person cabin, in effect, you know, it's one of those ones with a sliding door out into the corridor, and you don't really get to choose who you sat next to. And I had a couple of journeys on this trip. One there was 2 guys in who staggered in clutching plastic bags that were just chinking very heavily as they sat down, and they proceeded to drink gallons and gallons of beer and some unidentifiable white liquid that I just did not want to get involved with. And they got drunker and drunker and drunker. They never really exchanged a word with me. It was like I wasn't there. And the carriage was filling up with fumes. I mean, if you'd have struck a match in there, it would have been carnage. Number 2 was rather more sedate. That's on the way running down the river. And it was a beautiful ride with, you know, the rushing river on one side and hills on the other. And then somebody gets up and pulls down the shade over the window without consultation. And I kind of feel, well, surely there's got to be a vote here or something. That must be how it works.
You go out into the hall and you flag down that we're going to need a vote in here.
Yeah, I know. It was an executive decision, it seemed. So, and nobody else complained. And then you think, well, because, you know, the light's shining in, and I get that that's a little bit annoying, but I'm thinking this is the only time I'm probably ever going to ride this route. And now I literally can't see anything. So I had to go and stand in the corridor for a couple of hours and look out the window that side. But yeah, you know, what can I say? You can't choose your passengers.
Yeah, I'll tell you, like when those little 6 compartments, when you hit it right, it can be magical. Like, you know, my wife and I have been in one where we just had it to ourselves and we had music going.
Yeah.
And then there was another time, actually, ironically, when I was on my way into Ljubljana, but coming from Italy. And me and my friend Ryan, we had the compartment all to ourselves. We were the guys with beers in the plastic bags, you know. But yeah, just feeling it. Had the music on, you know. Not, and you know, there might have been someone else did show up, but they seemed to really enjoy our company.
Yeah, that's what you like to think, isn't it? Yeah. You made their journey, I'm sure.
We had a lot in common because in Ljubljana, we went straight from the train station and stayed at this hostel Celica.
Isn't that a great place? Yeah, I discovered that there's an old prison that they turned into a hostel. And I mean, that just sounds great when you say it like that, doesn't it? So
if you're not interested, you're not alive.
But it's actually really nice. I mean, it sounds like it could be a bit grim, and especially as a hostel, and it's a budget hostel. But basically, the cells are bedrooms, and it has some cells that have got 4 beds or 6 beds in bunks. But you could also get a private room and a little ensuite bathroom. But you're in a cell. It was absolutely fantastic. Really nice people, not expensive. Food was great. You know, really nice breakfast in the morning. And I just thought you could have picked any generic hotel down on the riverfront. But yeah.
No, it's super cool. And Ljubljana is just, the place is just perfect. And it's never, ever overrun. And personally, I think it's just people are afraid of the pronunciation, so they stay away.
I think that's right. Yeah. You don't want to have to buy a ticket at the station.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. It's a terrific city. It's not really as well known as any of the others, I don't think. I've been back since then. I went on a walking holiday in the hills from there, and that's where we started. You know, Slovenia is just a beautiful country. You know, the people are lovely. It's a stunning place. So yeah, that was the first time I'd been when I stayed on the train trip, and then yeah, I've been back since. So
can't say enough good things. And then you go over to Zagreb, where it was a bit of a washout in more ways than one.
Yeah, I mean the weather broke, I think, in Zagreb, so it was still, you know, it was still 100 degrees, but then it started raining. So.
And then there was some guy in your hotel that was, you know, nearly caused a flood.
Yes, well, that would be me. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. You see, when you're traveling around, as you know, you got to do your laundry at some point, and the trouble with moving on every night is you don't really have the chance to do that. So I had run out of things to wear by this point. So I was doing my laundry. So I'm in quite a small enclosed room in Zagreb. It's 40 degrees outside, but it is raining like biblical rain outside. So it's getting hotter and steamier everywhere. And I'm washing clothes in my tiny little bathroom, and the water is rising outside and the water is rising inside, and nothing dried. It's kind of steamed for about the next 2 or 3 days. And in the meantime, I had to go out and find something to eat, and it was just, and I had no clothes because they were either dirty or I didn't have anything else to wear, and it was thundering down with rain. I have seen very little of Zagreb, I have to admit. I mean, again, I really feel there should be a warning on this book. It's like, don't buy this as a guidebook, because you know you're not going to find out very much that's useful about many of these places.
I disagree because I think in almost every place you've given me an idea of something, you know, off the beaten track to do. We haven't listed them all out here because obviously we need to go buy the book ourselves and read.
Well, yes, indeed. Yes.
You're still accepting new purchases.
I am, funnily enough. Yeah, no, people are very welcome. No, you're right. And I get really lovely emails. I got one when the book came out that they read the book and they said, this is fantastic. We've literally just planned that same trip and they're going to take longer to do it, but they just thought everything in it was, and I thought, well, do you know, that's amazing. How cool is that? So I was delighted by that. And yeah, so there are nice things to do in the book for sure. Yeah, I suppose by not a guidebook, you know what I'm saying. I'm not recommending hotels and restaurants unless there's a story in it. Let's face it, I'm a writer first and foremost, and you know, I'm looking for a story a lot of the time, whether it reflects well on me or badly on me. So
Then it's a bit of a questionable overnight train.
Yeah, so we're talking night trains now. Now, mine was a real old style 6 berth couchette with the toilet down the hall. No suggestion of a shower or anything like that. Those toilets where when you go in, everything is made of stainless steel and bolted to the floor, and there's a foot pedal.
Like in prison, I would assume.
Exactly, but like kind of like a
just assume. I want to assume. I want to be clear.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like
a friend has told me.
Yes, exactly. Your friend told you exactly. And those are the facilities, and I had the top bunk, and there's no room at all. You kind of have to slide. You have to post yourself in to the top bunk. Kind of go up the ladder and lie down and kind of slide in, and then you can't raise your head, and I have to keep reminding you that it's 100 degrees outside, so it's more inside because this is a metal box that's sealed, all the way around. So that was an interesting experience. I don't do 6 berth couchettes anymore. That was it for me.
That was you went out on top.
Well, I have been on night train since, but I tell you now, the last one I went on was in Finland, Finnish Railways, first class, individual sleeper oh my goodness me. I tell you, you would never look back. You will never go in any other kind of sleeper train. It was an absolute delight from start to finish. So yeah,
that's a heck of an endorsement.
So yeah, I don't do the couchettes anymore.
I'm always back and forth on these. I'm usually in the camp of every time I do it, I'm like, why have I done this to myself?
Yeah.
But somehow a couple years later, I'll be like,
I know
it wasn't so bad. And then, so then we get to Liechtenstein.
I quite liked it. I was damned if I was going all the way past it and not getting off and getting a little stamp in my passport because, again, that's kind of the point of going. So it doesn't have any trains. You can get a bus anyway, and you can get a bus to the centre of town, and you can walk up halfway up the castle and have a look. And it's, but it's a tiny little Central European principality, and why not? But there's not a lot there, really. I was passing through. But from there, heading for Zurich. Now, that's a place I hadn't been since my footpath digging days, back when I was on my first trip. And that was great. When I first went there as an 18-year-old to Switzerland, it was great because, I don't know, we paid some registration fee, and then they put us up in a villa and gave us our food for 3 weeks. And we were working half the day anyway. And we had, may I say, we had dynamite. You want to give 18-year-old boys a good time, send them out into the Swiss Alps and give them dynamite to play with. Fantastic.
What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? So, I have very fond memories of Switzerland. And then I went back to Zurich on this train trip, and pizzas are about 45 quid. So it's
and no dynamite.
Yeah, and no dynamite. They kept all that to themselves. It was really interesting to see. I had no memories of Switzerland. And again, I just spent the night in Zurich, and I imagine it's quite a nice city if you have the money. Now I can afford a drink if I want one and a pizza. I'll bring myself to pay £16 for a small glass of wine. That just doesn't seem right. So yeah.
And then you finish off the cherry on top, the famous Bernina Express. I never get tired of hearing about this, down into Milan.
Well, that to me was the highlight of the trip, and it's really what the trip was built around. That was going to be the end piece. And it's the highest passenger train line in Europe. And it literally goes right over the top of the Alps. And it hits a pass between 2 lakes, and you have glaciers down either side as the train goes. It's the most extraordinary journey. You really never have seen scenery like that from a train. You are thousands of feet up in the Alps, and then eventually it winds its way across the border and down into Italy through this thing called the Brusio Viaduct, I think it is, and it's a circular viaduct, and it's because the incline is so steep to get down off the Alps. You can't really point a train straight down because it just goes too fast and fall off. So they take it in a huge big circle on a viaduct. And at one point the train is so long that if you stick your head out in the window and take photographs, you're taking a photograph of a circular train almost as it follows its way around. It's extraordinary, the whole journey. I mean, there are a million videos about it, including one I made actually. So you find my YouTube channel, there's a video on there about it. But yeah, that is. I mean, it's many people's favorite train ride in Europe, and I can see why. The absolute beauty of it is that if you book it in advance, it's really cheap. It's sounds like it should cost an absolute fortune. That it would be one of those luxury experiences. And I mean, there are panoramic carriages that you can book into, but you can just book a regular ticket. Your Interrail pass is valid. You don't need a reservation. You just turn up.
So then, once you've got a rail pass, it's actually free.
Yeah. So it's an extraordinary trip. I really, if people want one trip to say they've done a classic train journey with scenery in Europe, that would be the one I would recommend.
Yeah, and then that was a real fitting end, in Milan, and you went to some off the beaten path places there, and then.
So yeah, that was that, and I was exhausted at the end of that trip, and I came home and tried to forget about it. Okay, not doing that again. That was too hot. But after a while, it kind of percolated around in my mind, and I thought, do you know what? This would make a good book. And that's pretty much where this new set of travel writing ventures. I've written some memoirs, travel memoirs of places I've been. They're kind of more short stories about the places I've been. But Not Cool was the first kind of train adventure book.
So I would say, anybody that wants to vicariously ride around Europe, who just needs a travel hit, pick this up. I want to stress that these adventures that we've mentioned on the episode, this book is full of many more. We only scratched the surface.
We did. But I think we've given the flavour of the kind of idiot you can expect to be in charge of this trip. So
Absolutely.
I got the train bug again, and that's really what I wanted to do. And then I spent a couple of years thinking about the next one, and for various reasons it kept getting put off, but it's just come out just at the end of last year. So it's the second one in this series, really, and it's called Far Out. I had the idea of going to the north, the south, the east, and the westernmost train stations in Europe, and I do all that on one trip. So this was going to take a whole lot longer than 9 cities in 9 days, because I mean, it sounded like a really good idea. And then I opened out the map and saw what it would entail, which was, it's northern Norway. So we're not talking the northernmost point of Norway. We're talking the northernmost train station.
Got it.
So they're two different things, because, the top third of Norway is basically tundra and
but
reindeer,
no train station,
and tiny little fishing places and towns up above the Arctic Circle, but no railway stations. But there is one in Narvik, which is a heck of a long way up. And then the southernmost train station in Europe is Algeciras in southern Spain, in Andalusia, and between the two is maybe 7,000 kilometers. And you can take a train, not one train, but there is a train route to be done from north to south. Well, then when you look to east and west, it gets a little bit more complicated. In the westernmost is in Portugal, and it's kind of debatable, but Sintra, which is the sort of historic hill town near Lisbon, is the westernmost mainline train station in mainland Europe. And then there's a tiny little tram line that runs from there all the way down to the coast. And it's not a train, it's a tram, but you know what? It goes on rails, and I'm counting that. So it's a little seaside, it's a tiny little beach resort called Praia das Massas, Apple Beach. So that was my westernmost point. It's complicated by the fact that this is not the westernmost train station in Europe, as it turns out. It's the westernmost train station on the mainland of Europe, because Ireland is further west than this. the westernmost train station on the continent of Europe is actually at Tralee in Ireland. But
Okay.
I wasn't going to count that because I wanted continuous travel on the mainland. So I'm going to put that to one side. And then the easternmost was the hardest to figure out, because before you look at a map, if you're asked to say what's the easternmost train station in Europe, you'd be thinking, Romania or Bulgaria or maybe even the European side of, Istanbul on the European side. And if you look at the map and follow the lines, it's actually the bulge of Finland, right hard by the Russian border. It's not obvious, but you can work it out by looking at a map. And it was a tiny little station in the middle of nowhere. But even that's not, as obvious as you might think, because actually the easternmost train station in Europe is some place in the Ural Mountains in Russia. The town translates as Bear Corner, which kind of gives you, the walk in from the station to the town is going to be fun, isn't it? In Bear Corner. But, we can't go to Russia for obvious reasons. And then the next easternmost would be one of the stations in eastern Ukraine. And again, for obvious reasons, we're not going to be going there. The concept is simple, and the tagline was simple: the northeast, western, southern, east, and westernmost train stations in Europe. But then there's a tiny little asterisk at the end of all my descriptions, and it's mainland continental Europe, excluding Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus for obvious reasons.
So also, please don't email me about this.
Yeah, exactly. But having said all that, I defy you to find, further flung railway stations than the four I've mentioned on the European mainland that you can get to without entering a war zone or crossing water. So there you go.
Well, that's going to be the next book I read. So, all right, Jules, thanks so much for joining me. Before you go, how can someone get a hold of the books or, keep up with you and your adventures?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the books, depends how you read, but the books are available on Amazon, on Kindle, or from any bookshop. You could order them from any bookshop. But I have a website, julestoldme.com. You'll find everything on there. Yeah, and there's contact details on there, so knock yourselves out.
All right. I will see you on the rails.
Thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.